The fist pounding on Kieran Ward's door at dawn sounded like the percussion section of an apocalypse orchestra. He jerked awake, tangled in sheets that didn't quite fit the Valdrani sleeping platform, and his first thought was that he'd accidentally triggered the fire alarm again. His second thought, upon seeing the red glow of bioluminescent patterns through his door's translucent panel, was significantly more concerning. Royal Guard. That was definitely Royal Guard. Kieran Ward of Earth. The voice carried harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. By order of Her Majesty Queen Talvasha, you will come with us. Kieran's stomach dropped somewhere around his knees. He'd been so careful. 3 months on Valdrani Prime, working as a civilian consultant to integrate human engineering techniques with Valdrani crystalline technology. And he'd studied every protocol, respected every custom, kept his head down and his work focused. Can I at least put on pants? He called back. Silence, then, you have 30 seconds. 28 seconds later. Because Kieran was nothing if not efficient when terrified, he opened the door wearing yesterday's work clothes and his most confused expression. 4 Valdrani guards stood in the corridor, their pale blue skin marked with patterns that pulsed angry red. Their weapons, elegant crystalline constructs that hummed with contained energy, weren't quite pointed at him, but definitely weren't pointed away. What did I do? Kieran asked. You will learn. The lead guard, taller than the others, her facial markings more elaborate, gestured sharply. Come. They marched him through the residential quarter, where off-world contractors were housed. And Kieran caught glimpses of his colleagues peering through doorways, with expressions ranging from sympathy to schadenfreude. Jenkins from Water Reclamation actually mouthed, "What did you do?" As they passed, I wish I knew, Kieran thought desperately, running through the past week's activities. Had he accidentally insulted someone? Used the wrong eating utensil at the diplomatic dinner? Stepped on something sacred? The Valdrani had about 6,000 years of etiquette, and he'd had 3 months to learn it. The capital city of Arithshal was waking as they emerged into the streets. Valdrani citizens, humanoid enough to be familiar, alien enough to be unsettling, stopped to watch the procession. Some spat on the ground as Kieran passed, a Valdrani gesture of contempt. Others looked confused or sympathetic. Nobody explained anything. The royal palace rose ahead like a mountain of crystallized light, its spires reaching toward 3 moons that hung impossibly in the daylight sky. Kieran had seen it from a distance, but never been inside. His work kept him in the practical districts, far from whatever political theater happened in those gleaming towers. Up close, it was terrifying. The walls seemed to grow from the ground rather than being built, all organic curves and surfaces that pulsed with inner light. As they entered, the energy in the air made Kieran's teeth ache and his skin prickle. The guards' bioluminescent patterns shifted to formal blue as they passed through security checkpoints where other guards bowed deeply. Seriously, Kieran tried again. If someone just told me what I supposedly did wrong, maybe we could clear this up without the whole dramatic arrest thing. The lead guard glanced at him, and for a moment her markings flickered with something that might have been pity. You will stand before the Grand Court. The Queen herself brings charges. That is all you need to know. The Queen herself, oh good, just the absolute highest authority accusing him of something. They ascended through corridors that seemed to exist in impossible geometries, turning corners that led to spaces that shouldn't fit inside the structure's external dimensions. Valdrani architecture bent rules that human engineers were only beginning to understand. Finally, they reached massive doors that rose 3 stories high, carved from single pieces of crystal that showed swirling depths like frozen galaxies. The doors swung open silently. The grand court beyond was designed to make anyone standing at its center feel very, very small. The chamber rose in tiers on all sides, filled with hundreds of Valdrani nobles in elaborate robes that caught and refracted the light from floating orbs that illuminated the space. Their markings created a constellation of bioluminescent patterns, blues and greens and purples, each color combination indicating house and rank in ways Kieran had never fully memorized. At the far end, elevated on a dais of living crystal that seemed to grow from the floor, sat Queen Talvasha. Kieran had seen images, of course. Everyone had. She was ancient by human standards, had ruled Valdrani Prime for over 200 years, had witnessed humanity's first contact with the Valdrani people, had negotiated the treaties that allowed humans into Valdrani space. But images didn't capture the sheer presence of her. Her skin showed the pale blue of her species, but marked with bioluminescent patterns so complex they seemed to tell entire histories. Her robes flowed like liquid crystal, shifting colors with her movements. Her eyes, the one feature most similar to human eyes, fixed on Kieran with an intensity that made him want to apologize for crimes he hadn't committed yet. Beside her stood advisors and the High Council, all wearing expressions ranging from cold curiosity to outright contempt. The one closest to the throne, an older male whose markings indicated noble bloodline, looked at Kieran like he was examining something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. The guards marched Kieran to the center of the floor, a circular platform that lit up as he stepped onto it, making him visible from every tier of the court. Hundreds of eyes fixed on him. The murmuring that had filled the chamber faded to silence. Queen Talvasha rose from her throne with fluid grace, and Kieran's cultural training kicked in. He dropped to one knee and bowed his head, the proper gesture of respect for the monarchy. "You may rise," the queen said, her voice amplified through the chamber by technology or perhaps something else. It carried harmonics that resonated in Kieran's chest. He stood, carefully not making direct eye contact as protocol demanded. The queen descended 3 steps, bringing her closer but still elevated above him. "Kieran Ward of Earth," she announced, voice carrying to every corner of the Grand Court. "You stand accused of crimes against the eternal law. 7 charges have been brought before this court. The evidence will be presented, judgment will be rendered, the sentence will be carried." She paused, markings pulsing with colors Kieran couldn't interpret. "Do you contest the authority of this court to judge you?" Kieran's throat felt like he'd swallowed sand. He still didn't know what he'd supposedly done. But something in his grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, advice she'd given him before he left Earth. "When you don't know the rules, acknowledge the game but demand transparency." He straightened his spine, called on every ounce of dignity he possessed, and spoke clearly. "I contest nothing, Your Majesty, but I would very much appreciate knowing what I supposedly did wrong." A ripple moved through the assembled nobles, shock, maybe, or surprise. Apparently acknowledging authority while demanding explanation wasn't the usual response. The queen's markings flashed through several colors rapidly. Then something that might have been satisfaction or might have been anticipation settled into her patterns. "Very well," she said, and her voice carried an edge like crystal breaking. "Let the accusations begin. Let all witness the crimes of the human who thought himself above our laws." Kieran's hands clenched at his sides. Whatever was coming, he had a feeling his careful 3 months of respectful behavior were about to be reinterpreted in ways he hadn't anticipated. The queen raised one hand, and a holographic display materialized in the air above Kieran's head, large enough for the entire court to see. "Count 1, Queen Talvasha announced, and Kieran's world began to unravel. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage of Kieran from what must have been weeks ago. He barely recognized himself. The man in the recording looked more relaxed, laughing as he sat at a table in what Kieran now recognized as the working district's communal dining area. "Count 1, Queen Talvasha's voice rang through the chamber. Kieran Ward walked among the lowest castes without permission or escort. He shared meals with workers whose names he did not need to know. He treated laborers as equals when hierarchy is the foundation of our civilization." The image showed Kieran eating with construction workers, asking them questions about Valdrani welding techniques, laughing at a joke one of them made. He remembered that day he'd been trying to understand how the workers actually used the infrastructure he was designing. It seemed practical at the time. The nobles in the upper tiers murmured disapproval. Their markings pulsed with colors that Kieran's briefings had said indicated disgust or confusion. But in the lower galleries, sections Kieran now noticed contained commoners rather than nobility, the reaction was different. People leaned forward, their markings showing colors he couldn't interpret, but that felt less hostile. "Count 2, the queen continued. The display shifted to nighttime footage. Kieran saw himself stepping between a Valdrani guard and a young woman whose markings showed terror, their patterns pulsing erratic purple. He remembered this too. The girl had been caught after curfew, and the guard had his weapon raised, and Kieran had acted on instinct. He intervened in lawful punishment, the Queen said coldly. When a citizen violated curfew protocols, Kieran Ward placed himself between her and justice. He demanded explanation before enforcement. He questioned authority in public view, undermining the order that keeps our society stable. In the recording, Kieran was saying something to the guard, asking why curfew was so strictly enforced, suggesting that maybe escorting the girl home would accomplish the same goal as punishment. The guard had eventually agreed, clearly uncomfortable with a foreign consultant challenging him. More murmuring from the nobles. But the girl in the recording, Kieran could see her in the common gallery now, her markings flashing recognition and something that looked like gratitude. Count 3. The archives. Footage of Kieran surrounded by ancient texts that floated in preservation fields, his face lit by their glow as he carefully studied symbols and histories. He entered sacred spaces reserved for scholars and nobility. Queen Talvasha's voice carried an edge now. He read histories meant only for those of pure bloodline. He sought knowledge above his station, delving into texts that common beings are forbidden to touch. Kieran had been researching Valdrani cultural history, trying to understand the context for the engineering decisions he was making. The archivist had given him permission, or at least he'd thought she had. Maybe something had been lost in translation. Count 4. An image of Kieran politely but firmly declining a gift from a noble. A minor house dignitary who'd offered to sponsor him, which apparently involved some kind of patronage relationship Kieran hadn't fully understood. He rejected offerings from his betters, the Queen said, showing contempt for our traditions of reciprocity and honor. He claimed to require no patronage, insulting those who showed him favor and suggesting he stood above such customs. That gift had come with strings Kieran hadn't wanted to pull. He tried to decline gracefully. Apparently, grace hadn't translated. Count 5. Footage of Kieran working alongside construction crews, actually wielding the crystalline welding tools himself rather than just directing the work. He performed manual labor when his position required only oversight, the Queen continued. He dirtied his hands with work meant for lesser beings, degrading the role he was given and suggesting that our social structure, refined over millennia, was somehow flawed. The construction workers in the common gallery were sitting up straighter now. Their markings showed colors that felt warmer, more engaged. Count 6. A public fountain during the heat wave 2 weeks ago. Kieran distributing water to a line of overheated workers who'd been waiting for official distribution channels that were moving too slowly. He distributed resources without authorization from proper channels. Queen Talvasha's voice was sharp. He assumed authority over public goods that he had no right to control. He decided, without consultation, that his judgment superseded our established systems of resource allocation. People had been suffering. The official channels were backed up with bureaucracy. It had seemed like the obvious solution. And finally, Count 7. The image made Kieran's blood run cold. It showed him in the palace gardens. He'd been there exactly once, brought by a Valdrani colleague to see the famous heartstone formations. The recording showed him bending down, picking up a crystalline shard that lay broken on the ground, holding it carefully. He touched the heartstones, and now the Queen's voice carried something deeper than anger, something like genuine shock or fear. Sacred fragments of our ancestors' consciousness, crystallized in physical form. He touched them with unwashed hands and impure intent. He violated the most ancient prohibition of our people, a law so fundamental that children learn it before they can speak. The entire court gasped. Even the common gallery reacted with shock, markings flashing colors that needed no translation, horror, disbelief. Kieran wanted to protest that he'd been trying to help, that the shard was broken and abandoned, that he just wanted to move it somewhere safe. But the weight of 7 accusations pressed down on him like gravity. Queen Talvasha descended another step, now close enough that Kieran could see the complex patterns of her markings shifting with emotion. For these violations of the eternal law, she said, voice carrying to every corner of the Grand Court, the penalty is clear. You will be exiled from Valdrani space. Your contracts are void. Your name will be struck from all records of service. You will be returned to Earth with the understanding that you are never to return, never to contact our people, never to. Your Majesty, a voice rang out from the common gallery, cutting through the Queen's pronouncement like a blade through cloth. Every head in the chamber turned. An old Valdrani woman stood in the lower tier, her markings faded with age, but pulsing now with urgent blue light that indicated a need to speak truth. Her hands trembled, but her voice was strong. "Your Majesty, I beg permission to speak." The Queen's markings flashed through colors too quickly to read: surprise, irritation, confusion. "Elder, this is not a public forum. The judgment has been rendered, and the eternal law grants right of testimony to any citizen when the 7 signs are invoked." The old woman's voice grew stronger. "I invoke that right by ancient covenant." The nobles erupted in chaos. Advisors leaned toward the Queen, whispering urgently. The High Council member closest to the throne looked like he was about to have a stroke, his markings pulsing colors Kieran had never seen. Queen Talvasha raised both hands for silence. It took several moments to achieve. "Elder," the Queen said carefully, "you speak of ancient covenants that have not been invoked in living memory. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" "I am certain, Your Majesty." The old woman bowed deeply. "The eternal law is not merely prohibition, it is also prophecy, and I believe, no, I know, that we have just witnessed the fulfillment of the 7 signs." The chamber went absolutely silent. "The 7 signs," the old woman continued, voice carrying through the stillness, "that mark the coming of the Kashar-Un." She turned to face not the Queen, but Kieran, the Unbidden King, the one who leads not because he seeks power, but because power seeks him. And suddenly, the murmuring in the common gallery became something else entirely. People were pulling out data pads, checking markings pulsing with intensity that belied her age. The nobles watched in shocked silence as she made her way to the main floor, and not a single guar tried to stop her. "The eternal law," she said, voice ringing clear, "contains 2 aspects. The first is structure, the rules we live by, the hierarchy we maintain. But the second is prophecy. The 7 signs that herald the Kashar-Un, the Unbidden King who will come when the people need him most." Queen Talvasha's, the old woman descended from the common gallery with surprising speed. Her faded markings flickered through patterns too complex to read. "The prophecy is metaphor, Elder. Poetry meant to inspire virtue, not to be taken as literal prediction of." "With respect, Your Majesty," the old woman interrupted, and the fact that she did so without being immediately arrested spoke to the weight of whatever ancient law she'd invoked. "You have just recited the 7 signs yourself. You called them crimes, the prophecy calls them confirmations." She turned to address the entire court, her voice gaining strength. "The first sign, he shall walk among the forgotten and see them as kin, not as subjects or servants, but as equals, as people whose names he learns and whose stories matter." She gestured toward the holographic display, still showing Kieran eating with workers. "He did this." From the common gallery, voices called out, "He knew my name, he asked about my family, he treated us like we mattered." "The second sign," another commoner stood, a middle-aged woman whose markings showed merchant-class colors. "He shall stand between the weak and the blade, questioning justice itself, not undermining authority, but ensuring authority serves justice rather than merely enforcing power." The young woman Kieran had protected that night stood as well. "He saved me from punishment I didn't deserve." The guard was angry that day, looking for someone to discipline. Kieran Ward asked why before accepting what? Her voice broke. No noble has ever asked why. The murmuring was spreading now through the common galleries, like fire through dry grass. More people were standing, pulling out old texts on data pads, comparing the Queen's accusations against ancient prophecy. A young Valdrani scholar in the middle galleries, neither noble nor common, but somewhere between, rose with trembling hands. "The third sign, he shall seek wisdom in sacred places, though born without right to it. Not to steal or corrupt, but to understand, to learn." He looked at Kieran with something like awe. "What did you study in the archives, human?" Kieran's throat felt tight. "History, your social evolution. I wanted to understand how your culture developed so I could better help with infrastructure that worked with your values instead of against them." "He sought to serve us better," the scholar said, voice thick with emotion, "by understanding us first." The Queen's closest advisor leaned toward her, whispering urgently. Her markings flashed colors that Kieran's briefing had said indicated someone trying to maintain composure in the face of disaster. "The fourth sign," a construction worker's voice boomed from the upper common gallery. He shall refuse the gifts of the powerful, needing no patron but his own merit. He turned down House Kalish's sponsorship. Because he didn't want to be owned, another worker added. Didn't want obligations that would compromise his work. The fifth sign, the voices were overlapping now, dozens speaking together. He shall labor with his hands though his mind could command, honoring all work as sacred. Images of Kieran working alongside construction crews, learning their techniques, respecting their expertise even as he contributed his own knowledge. Not commanding from above, but collaborating from within. The sixth sign, the merchant woman's voice rang clear. He shall distribute the wealth of the world without seeking permission, for true authority needs no crown. He gave water during the heat wave when the official channels moved too slow. People were suffering, someone shouted. The bureaucracy didn't care, he did. The chanting was spreading through the common galleries now, a rhythmic pulse. 7 signs, 7 signs, 7 signs. Queen Talvasha raised both hands, markings flashing colors that demanded silence. Gradually, reluctantly, the voices quieted. Enough, she said, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated with command. You speak of 6 signs. The prophecy requires 7, and the 7th, the touching of the heartstones. Her markings pulsed with something that looked like pain. The heartstones reject the unworthy. They burn in pure hands. They crack when touched by ambition. They darken in the presence of cruelty. If he truly violated that prohibition, the evidence would be clear. The old woman smiled. Yes, Your Majesty, it would be. She turned to Kieran, and her markings showed colors of reverence that made him profoundly uncomfortable. The heartstone you touched in the garden, she said softly. Did it burn you? Did it crack or darken? Kieran's mind raced back to that moment. He'd been walking with Saren, a Valdrani engineer he'd been working with. She'd brought him to see the heartstone formations, crystalline structures that supposedly contained fragments of ancestral consciousness, crystallized thought and memory made physical. One piece had been on the ground, broken from the main formation, and Kieran had bent to pick it up. It felt warm, he said slowly. When I touched it, I swear it pulsed, like it had a heartbeat. I thought I was imagining it. Show us your hands, the old woman commanded with surprising authority. Kieran extended his hands, palms up, unmarked, unburned, not even a trace of redness. The common gallery erupted, because apparently, and this was not in any briefing Kieran had received, the heartstones were supposed to violently reject anyone unworthy. The fact that he'd touched one and walked away unharmed was either impossible or significant, and the crowd was clearly leaning toward significant. Bring forth the heartstone, someone shouted. Let him touch it before all witnesses. The demand spread through the crowd. Test him, prove the prophecy. The queen's markings cycled through patterns that spoke of internal struggle. Her advisors were arguing with each other in rapid Valdrani, their voices rising above whispers. The High Council looked variously horrified, confused, and in one case, thoughtfully contemplative. Finally, Queen Talvasha gestured sharply. Very well, if the people demand proof they shall have. A guard departed with obvious reluctance and returned minutes later, carrying a case that hummed with containment fields. Inside, visible through transparent crystal, rested a heartstone fragment larger than the one Kieran had found, about the size of a human fist, pulsing with internal light. The guard placed the case on a pedestal at the center of the floor, near where Kieran stood. The containment fields deactivated with a sound like a sigh. Queen Talvasha descended the remaining steps until she stood level with Kieran. Up close, he could see the weight of centuries in her eyes, the burden of ruling written in patterns across her skin. If this is truly prophecy fulfilled, she said quietly, meant only for him though the chamber's perfect acoustics carried her words to everyone, then the heartstone will confirm it. But know this, Kieran Ward of Earth. If you are false, if this is deception or manipulation or simply terrible luck, the stone will not merely reject you. Her markings pulsed with something that looked like genuine concern. It will kill you. Kieran's heart hammered against his ribs. Your Majesty, I don't want to be king. I don't want power or authority or whatever this prophecy supposedly offers. I just wanted to help people. I thought that was the right thing to do. I know, she said, and her markings softened fractionally. That is precisely what terrifies me. She stepped back, gesturing toward the heartstone. The entire grand court held its breath. Kieran approached the pedestal. The heartstone pulsed with light that seemed to respond to his proximity, growing brighter with each step. Up close, he could see depths within the crystal, patterns that looked almost like circuitry or perhaps neural pathways, complexity that suggested consciousness rather than mere rock. He extended his hand, fingers trembling. "Wait," he said, pulling back. "If I do this, if it works, what happens then?" "Then," Queen Talvasha said, voice heavy with implications, "everything changes." Kieran looked out at the crowd, at the commoners in the galleries who'd spoken for him, who'd recognized in his actions something they'd been waiting for. At the nobles who looked ready to riot. At the queen whose throne he'd apparently just threatened by trying to do his job with integrity. "I don't want a throne," he said clearly, speaking to all of them. "I want to help, that's all I've ever wanted." "Then prove it," the old woman said gently. "Touch the heartstone, let the ancestors judge." Kieran Ward, who'd come to Valdrani Prime to consult on water treatment systems, and had somehow ended up accused of sacred crimes that might actually be prophetic signs, took a deep breath and placed his hand on the heartstone. Light exploded through the grand court. Not metaphorically, actual light, brilliant and overwhelming, radiating from the point where Kieran's skin met crystal. It pulsed in waves that made every Valdrani in the chamber gasp, their own markings responding sympathetically, glowing brighter than Kieran had ever seen. The light carried warmth without burning. It flooded through Kieran's hand, up his arm, spreading across his chest and into his mind. And with it came presence. Vast and ancient, accumulated consciousness of generations, examining him with attention that felt both gentle and inexorable. He felt them judging, not his actions, but his intentions. Not what he'd done, but why he'd done it. The heartstone didn't care about protocol or hierarchy. It cared about the space between thought and action, about the choices made when nobody was watching, about the character that existed when there was no reward for being good. The light intensified, and Kieran heard something, not sound exactly, but meaning that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to understanding. A voice that was thousands of voices, speaking in unison. "You do not seek power." "Good. Power seeks you anyway. Will you run or will you serve?" "I'll serve," Kieran thought back, not sure if the communication worked both ways but trying anyway. "But I don't know how." That, the voices replied with something that felt like approval, is the first wisdom. The light faded gradually, settling back into the heartstone's normal glow. Kieran's hand remained on the crystal, unmarked and unburned. The stone pulsed with brilliant luminescence now, brighter than it had been before he touched it, and patterns of light danced across its surface like aurora borealis captured in stone. Silence crashed through the grand court like a physical force. Then, from the back of the common gallery, one voice started, "Kashar-Un." Another joined, "Kashar-Un." 10 more, "Kashar-Un." 100, "Kashar-Un, Kashar-Un." The chant spread like thunder, rolling through the common galleries and into the merchant sections, and even, reluctantly, touching the edges of the noble tiers. The rhythm pounded through the chamber, shaking the crystalline walls. "Kashar-Un. Kashar-Un, King, King, King." Kieran Ward stood in the center of an alien throne room, hand still resting on a stone that contained the approval of countless ancestors, while an entire civilization declared him their prophesied ruler. His legs felt like water. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. He looked at Queen Talvasha, whose markings showed patterns he couldn't begin to interpret, shock and resignation, and something that might have been relief. "I really don't want to be king," he said weakly. "I know," she replied, and now her markings shifted to something that looked almost like a smile. "That is exactly why you will be." The chanting continued, growing louder, more insistent, and Kieran realized with a combination of horror and weird inevitability that his life had just been permanently, irrevocably changed by his stubborn insistence on treating people like they mattered. Sometimes the universe had a strange sense of humor. The chanting continued for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 10 minutes. Queen Talvasha finally raised both hands, and gradually, reluctantly, silence returned to the grand court. The energy in the chamber had fundamentally transformed. Where there had been judgment and accusation, now there was anticipation tinged with chaos. "It seems," the queen said, voice carefully controlled but markings showing patterns that suggested profound internal turmoil, that the eternal law has spoken more clearly than anticipated. She descended the remaining steps until she stood directly before Kieran, close enough that he could see the weight of 2 centuries in the depths of her eyes. "I brought you here to condemn you," she said quietly, pitched for his ears, though the court's acoustics carried her words throughout the chamber. "To remove a disruption to our carefully maintained social order. To preserve the hierarchy that has kept Valdrani civilization stable for 6,000 years. "I'm sorry," Kieran said and meant it. "I wasn't trying to disrupt anything, I just wanted to help." "I know, that is precisely the problem." Her markings flickered through several colors. "Or perhaps it is the solution we did not know we needed." She turned to address the full court. "The heartstones do not lie, they cannot lie. They are crystallized truth, the accumulated wisdom and consciousness of our ancestors given physical form. When they accept someone, truly accept, as we have just witnessed, it is not an endorsement of politics or power. It is recognition of character." A noble in the upper gallery leaped to his feet, his markings pulsing colors that needed no translation, outrage and disbelief. "Your Majesty, you cannot seriously suggest that this human, this outsider who has been here barely 3 months, should rule over those of us whose bloodlines stretch back millennia." "I suggest nothing," Talvasha's voice cut like crystal. "The eternal law suggests. The heartstones confirm. And the people," she gestured toward the common galleries, "have spoken. By ancient covenant, when the 7 signs manifest in a single being, that being holds the right to the Kashar-Un." She paused, markings showing something complex, the authority that supersedes even the throne. The nobles erupted in protest. Multiple advisors rushed toward the queen, arguing in rapid Valdrani that the translator struggled to parse. The High Council members were on their feet, some shouting, others deep in frantic consultation with data pads showing ancient legal texts. Through it all, Kieran stood next to the still-glowing heartstone, feeling like reality had tilted sideways and forgotten to tilt back. The queen raised her hands again, and after a longer struggle this time, silence returned. "The question," she said, looking directly at Kieran, "is whether you will accept." Every instinct Kieran possessed screamed at him to refuse, to run, to get on the next transport back to Earth and never look at another alien culture again. He wasn't qualified to rule anything, let alone an advanced civilization with 6,000 years of complex social structure. He could barely manage his own apartment's recycling system. But he looked out at the common gallery, at faces that had been invisible to him in his first weeks here until he'd started actually seeing them. The workers who'd taught him crystalline welding techniques while sharing stories about their families. The merchants who'd helped him understand Valdrani commerce while explaining how the caste system limited their opportunities. The young woman he'd protected from excessive punishment, now standing with others who'd been helped by his unconscious fulfillment of ancient prophecy. He thought about the archives, about the histories he'd studied. Valdrani society hadn't always been so rigidly hierarchical. Somewhere in the distant past, the culture had valued merit alongside bloodline, service alongside status. But centuries of accumulating power at the top had calcified the structure, making it harder and harder for anyone born low to rise, regardless of their abilities or character. "I have conditions," Kieran heard himself say. The gasps rippled through the chamber. Queen Talvasha's markings flickered surprise, so profound her patterns momentarily lost coherence. "You have conditions?" she repeated slowly. "You stand before the throne of Valdrani Prime, confirmed by the heartstones, acknowledged by ancient law, and you have conditions." "Yes, Your Majesty. Because if I'm going to do this, and apparently I am, because I'm too stubborn to turn away from people who need help, then we're doing it my way." A noble actually fainted. Guards rushed to catch him. Kieran pressed on before his courage failed. "First condition, you keep the throne, full authority. I don't know Valdrani law, I barely understand your culture, and I'm definitely not qualified to run a government. You've been doing this for 200 years. Keep doing it, I'll serve as." He searched for words, as advocate, for the common people, to make sure their voices reach you. Relief flooded across Talvasha's markings so obviously that several nobles noticed and looked confused. "You would accept the title but cede the power." "I don't want the power, I want to help. There's a difference." "Continue," she said, markings now showing what might have been cautious interest. "Second, the caste system needs reform. not eliminated overnight. I understand these things take time and sudden changes cause chaos, but we start breaking down barriers. Merit starts mattering more than bloodline. Education becomes available to all levels. Opportunities open based on ability instead of birth. The nobles erupted again, but the common galleries cheered so loudly they drowned out the protest. Third, I keep my actual job. Infrastructure improvements, education exchanges, practical engineering work. Whatever authority this prophecy gives me, I use it to serve the people, not to sit on a throne making pronouncements. Fourth, and now Kieran looked directly at the queen, partnership. You teach me what I don't know about Valdrani culture and law. I remind you of the principles your ancestors valued, the ones that got encoded into prophecy because they mattered. Together, maybe we can build something that honors both tradition and progress. Fifth and final, I'm going to make mistakes, lots of them. Huge, embarrassing, probably offensive mistakes. When I do, tell me, publicly if necessary. This only works if we're honest with each other, and if the people see that even the Kashar-Un can be corrected. Silence held for several heartbeats. Then Queen Talvasha did something that made the entire court gasp in unified shock. She knelt, not a formal bow, not a gesture of respect between equals. An actual knee-on-the-ground, head-bowed kneel of the sort reserved for absolute submission to authority. Your Majesty, Kieran reached to help her up automatically, then froze as guards moved toward him. No, Talvasha said, staying kneeling, markings showing patterns that looked almost like joy. Let them see. Let all witness that the prophecy was right. She looked up at Kieran, and tears streaked through the bioluminescent patterns on her face. For 200 years, I have ruled by maintaining order, by enforcing hierarchy, by believing that structure was the same as strength. Her voice broke slightly. You teach me, teach all of us, that strength comes from service. That true authority derives not from the power to command, but from the willingness to serve. She rose with grace, and Kieran helped her stand, another breach of protocol that would have been unthinkable hours ago. I accept these conditions, Kashar-Un, she said clearly for all to hear, and I propose partnership. You remind us of the laws we have forgotten. I teach you the laws you do not yet know. Together, perhaps we can become what our people actually need rather than merely what tradition demands. She turned to the assembled court. Let it be recorded in the eternal law. Kieran Ward of Earth is confirmed as Kashar-Un, bearing authority to speak for the common people and to question even the throne in their name. His conditions are accepted. His partnership with the crown is established. Let those who oppose this decision speak now or hold their peace. Several nobles looked like they wanted to speak, but the common galleries were on their feet, chanting again, Kashar-Un, Kashar-Un. And perhaps more importantly, the heartstone on its pedestal pulsed with brilliant light, as if the ancestors themselves were approving this unprecedented arrangement. The ceremony that followed was hastily improvised, but deeply meaningful. Kieran was given not a crown. The Kashar-Un didn't wear one, apparently, as a reminder that authority came from within rather than from symbols, but a circlet of heartstone that rested against his forehead and pulsed gently with what felt like approval. He spoke an oath in halting Valdrani, coached through the pronunciation by the old woman who'd started all this. He promised to serve with integrity, to question authority including his own, to walk among all castes as equals, to honor both wisdom and labor, to seek truth over comfort, to build rather than simply preserve. The words felt too big for him, too important, but he meant every one of them. When the ceremony concluded, the common gallery erupted in celebration. Even some of the nobles were clapping, though others stormed out in protest. Queen Talvasha stood beside him, her markings showing patterns that mixed relief and apprehension, and something that might have been hope. You have created significant chaos, she murmured as attendants rushed around organizing the aftermath. Sorry, Kieran said, chaos seems to follow me. Do not apologize. Chaos is merely change seen from the perspective of those who fear it. She looked at the celebrating crowd. Perhaps we needed chaos. Perhaps we needed someone too ignorant of our traditions to be constrained by them. That's either a compliment or a very polite insult. It is both. You will find I excel at multitasking. Hours later, after ceremonies and presentations and more protocol than Kieran thought could physically exist, he found himself on a palace balcony watching Valdrani's 3 moons rise over the capital. The city below was lit up with celebrations, bioluminescent patterns creating rivers of light through the streets. Queen Talvasha joined him, carrying 2 cups of something luminescent that she'd assured him was safe for human consumption. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, offering him a cup. "Having all the thoughts, simultaneously. It's very crowded in my head right now." She laughed, a sound he didn't know she was capable of making, harmonics creating a melody. "Good. A ruler who doesn't question themselves is dangerous. I'm not a ruler. We established that I'm more like a professional reminder system. You are something better than a ruler. You are a catalyst." She gestured toward the city below. "For centuries, we have confused stability with stagnation. You force us to remember the difference." "I'm really, truly, genuinely not qualified for this," Kieran said quietly. "No," Talvasha agreed, markings showing colors of absolute certainty. "But you are also the only one who didn't want it, who didn't seek it, who would have been perfectly content to do your job and go home." She sipped her drink. The heartstones recognized what we had forgotten. The best leaders are often those who must be convinced to lead, because they understand that authority is burden, not privilege. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the moons rise and the city celebrate below. Somewhere in the palace, advisors were probably arguing about protocols. In the common districts, people were likely planning how to use their new advocate. In noble houses, contingency plans were being drawn. "What happens now?" Kieran finally asked. "Now," Talvasha said, "you teach me to see my people the way you see them. And I teach you to navigate the political structures necessary to actually help them. Now, we discover whether prophecy can coexist with pragmatism." Her markings shifted to something warm. "Now we attempt something that has never been tried. A partnership between throne and people, with you as the bridge between." "No pressure then." "None at all," she agreed with what might have been sarcasm. "Merely the future of an entire civilization, resting on whether a human engineer can succeed at a job he never wanted." Kieran laughed, surprising himself. "When you put it that way, how can I fail?" "You will fail, often. That is the nature of this work." Talvasha's